Ancient Rome is famous for its power, but behind that, many people worked dangerous jobs where survival just wasn't guaranteed. For them, facing deadly risks was just part of everyday life. So here are my picks for the most dangerous jobs from ancient Rome and why they were so deadly. Gladiators. You've probably seen the movies, but in reality it wasn't all about glory and applause. For most gladiators it was a daily battle just to stay alive. So who were the gladiators? Most of the gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals. A few people did volunteer, but honestly not many people willingly signed up for this. They were trained in special schools, which were basically intense training camps, where they learned how to fight with swords, nets, tridents, you name it. You can think of it like an ancient version of a boot camp, except there's no end in sight unless you died or got really lucky. What were their chances of surviving? Gladiators didn't always kill each other because they were expensive to train and organisers wanted to get the most out of their investment. But that didn't mean that their chances were good. The average gladiator's life expectancy was only in their mid-20s and about 1 in 5 died in the arena. So after a few matches the odds were against them and statistically they didn't survive past their 5th fight. Also, fun fact, you know the famous thumbs up thumbs down thing? Yeah, that might not have happened exactly how Hollywood shows it. Ancient sources are a bit vague, but what's clear is that the final call, life or death, usually came down to the guy running the games, not the audience. Roman soldiers. They're the guys who kept the empire expanding, but let's be real, the job wasn't as glamorous as it sounds. What was life like for a Roman soldier? Roman soldiers, or legionaries, signed up for 25 years of service. Imagine that, 2.5 decades of hard labour marching through swamps, deserts and freezing cold mountains, all while carrying extremely heavy gear. And yeah, they got paid, but after buying their own armour, food and even funeral costs, they weren't exactly rolling around in sesterces. The real threat to Roman soldiers wasn't just enemy tribes or armies. Sure, they had to deal with brutal combat, but the worst killer was disease. Malaria, dysentery, infections from wounds. Most soldiers didn't make it to old age because they caught something that medicine back then just couldn't handle. So even if they were a great fighter, a bad fever could take them out. One of my favourite stories from ancient Rome is about a huge military disaster that happened in 9 CE. 3 legions, around 15,000 men, were ambushed and wiped out by Germanic tribes in the Teutoburg forest. Almost no one survived, and the loss was so bad that Emperor Augustus was said to have spent months muttering, "Varus, give me back my legions." Miners. Let's go underground for a minute, because mining in ancient Rome, that was as bad as it gets. If you were a slave working in the mines, you weren't just digging for gold or silver, you were digging your own grave. So what exactly were they mining for? Well, just like most empires, the Romans needed precious metals to fuel their economy, and they got it by forcing slaves to work in mines across the empire. Workers had to squeeze through tiny, poorly ventilated tunnels using simple tools to carve out rock. And don't think that they got to leave at the end of the day because these guys basically lived down there. Why was it so deadly? Aside from the obvious, cave-ins, falling rocks, the air in these mines was toxic. Pliny the Elder, a Roman writer, talked about miners dying from mercury and lead poisoning. They had no ventilation, so they were breathing in poisonous gases all day. What was their life expectancy? On average, a miner's life expectancy wasn't much more than 30 years, and that's if they even made it that far. Between the exhaustion, the fumes, the accidents, it was a death sentence for most. Mining in ancient Rome was actually so dangerous that they had entire teams whose only job was to haul up the bodies of dead workers who died down there. Chariot racing. Chariot racing was one of the most popular sports in ancient Rome, but it was also one of the most dangerous. Drivers weren't just competing for victory, each race could easily have been their last. What were the chariot races like? The races took place in huge arenas like the Circus Maximus, with up to 250,000 people watching. Drivers, or aurigai, controlled teams of horses, usually around 4 at a time, and raced them at high speeds around sharp curves. The problem? The crashes were very bad. Once a chariot flipped, the driver could get trampled by other horses or dragged along by the reins. How dangerous was it? Let's just say this wasn't a sport with a lot of survivors. Historians estimate that around 30% of chariot racers didn't make it through their careers. Even the top racers like Scorpus, who won over 2,000 races, died when they were just 27. If you were really good though, the money was insane. The most successful charioteer, Gaius Appuleius Diocles, earned so much prize money that by today's standards he would be worth around $15 billion. But is the money really worth it if you're dead before 30? Firefighters. Being a firefighter in ancient Rome wasn't anything like it is today. The firefighters, or Vigiles, faced constant danger with barely any equipment, and the fires that they were sent to control could quickly turn deadly. What did they do? The Vigiles were basically Rome's combination of firefighters and night watchmen. The city was mostly built of wood, and fires broke out all the time. The most famous was the Great Fire of 64 CE, which burned for 6 days and destroyed 2/3 of the city. The Vigiles had to fight fires using nothing more than buckets of water and basic hand pumps, which weren't exactly the most efficient tools. Why was it so dangerous? There was obviously the fire, but imagine running into a burning building made of wood and stone, trying to save people and having the whole building collapse on you. That's what the Vigiles faced. And on top of that, they also had to deal with criminals during their night patrols. So they weren't just risking their lives in fires, they could also just randomly get stabbed in a dark alley. The Vigiles were often slaves or freedmen, and while their job was critical to the city, they were often paid very little and had no status. In other words, high risk, low reward. Beast Hunters. Last but definitely not least, we got the Venatores, or Beast Hunters. These guys had to travel to the far corners of the Roman Empire to capture wild animals for the Colosseum games. Lions, tigers, leopards, and even elephants. What was their job? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like, hunting some of the deadliest animals on Earth with basic weapons like spears and nets. On top of that, they also had to bring them back alive. Not exactly a walk in the park. Why was it so dangerous? Well, aside from the obvious risk of being mauled alive, there were plenty of other dangers. The hunters had to travel through harsh environments, like deserts and jungles, where they could easily die from dehydration, starvation, or even get attacked by local tribes. Most didn't make it back alive. The animals were captured for the Venatores, which were special events in the Colosseum where animals would fight each other or humans. In one set of the games, it's recorded that over 9,000 animals were killed in just a few days, so if you survived the hunt, you'd watch your prize just get slaughtered. These were the jobs that kept the Roman Empire functioning, but for those doing them, the risks were life-threatening. From the arenas to the frontiers and the deep underground, these workers faced dangers that are hard to imagine today. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more ancient history videos. I try to make one every week. Thanks again.